Okay, I'd just like to start with thanking all of you for coming. Because this is such a nice display of the work, I thought it'd be nice to show you the work here. I mean, what this has in common with some of the other projects is that it's on a housing estate, except I live on this housing estate. And in 2012, a man from Lambeth Council in London, he came and told us that the houses we were living in weren't fit for purpose and they had to be knocked down. And we were quite surprised at this because there didn't seem to be anything wrong with our houses. And this was the beginning of their slow process of telling us that we couldn't live on this land anymore. And instead of, I don't really want to talk about regeneration and housing problems and councils and all this stuff, just to say that what's happening in London is very similar to what's happening here. And people are being displaced. And basically the land is worth a lot of money. This housing estate is, it was actually built as an antithesis to the big concrete blocks. It's very low density, it's very green, and it's right next to a park. Because it's next to a park, the land's worth a lot of money. And just to give you a sense of how, because it is all about money, it's actually not really about housing. The council said that they would buy my modest one-bedroom flat for $250,000, which of course is a lot of money. But if I wanted to come back to their new one, I'd have to pay $440,000. So that says it all, really. It's just, it's a scam. But I didn't want to get involved with the council and the campaigning against them. There's very good people who are doing that. There's a virulent campaign. It's been quite effective. Who knows, it might stop them. But I was very angry and I needed to do something with this anger, because being angry with the council just burns you out, really. Because before you while you focus your anger on one particular person, before you know it, they've moved on and there's somebody else. And at the time I was making this film, because I normally make documentary films, and I was making this film in a mental asylum in Mexico run by its own patients, and it was a very tough project to make. And I thought, okay, do I make a film about the estate, about the council, about this battle going on? And I didn't think it was appropriate. And then I thought, well, why not go back to a medium where I started, which was photography. And unlike a mental asylum in Mexico, I was from this place and I was part of the community, and all my projects had been about other people, and this one included me. And so I just started going around, and I attended lots of meetings, and people would be very angry and be complaining about everything. And then I'd say, look, can I come round your house? And then you'd have a cup of tea, and then people would complain to me for half an hour, moan about the council, we'd have a good moan. And then I'd say, okay, well, what is it about your home that's important? And I was interested in this idea of home being a sanctuary, but also the fact that we are having to accept that the sanctity of home is a temporary thing. And it's a very hard thing to accept when, especially some people have been living there for 45 years since the estate was built. So I wanted to take you through these pictures and just tell you a little bit about the people as a sort of tribute to the work, really, because a lot of these photographs I was back up to 5 times sometimes, because I need to get it right and I get very obsessed with it. I should say as well that these photographs, they started off like this, and I took them to Kim at Photo Fusion. She was the first person to see them. And I was quite fixated on getting them into a gallery, because I thought, well, that's how you get recognition for the work. And then I showed a selection just on a laptop at the Photographers Gallery in London. And it's just an open thing where the public can walk in and talk to you about your work. And a woman from Bristol, I didn't know, who was just down for the day, said, why don't you show them on the estate? And I thought, well, that's a good idea. And then she said, no, you can print them on PVC. And then I put them up on the estate, and I put 9 2x3 meter prints up on the estate. And that was in June 17. And the recognition from the people on the estate was incredible. And it's really surprised me because what started off as a sort of, as a protest really against what was happening, and getting into people's houses and realizing that people's lives were far more interesting and far more important and far more complex than this kind of edict from the council that had come down telling us we had to move. And putting these pictures up on the estate was very modest but a very powerful statement, just saying that we existed. And the council, all the council were concerned about was, is it part of the campaign? And I said, well, it's not, and that was the truth, but it just says, here we are. And in many ways, it's the most successful work I've ever done, just because of that, just to put them up on the walls. And they're still there now, 2.5 years later. This one, he was 16 at the time. This was his first day at sixth form college. He had just ironed the shirt, and I was there at dawn. This young man was very relaxed, and I thought it said a lot about just the point he was at in his life. And he was one of the younger people I took a photograph of. This woman here, Helen, we decided we were going to create a sort of Cindy Sherman type scenario where she was going to play a character. So we had this idea that she'd been up all night and just got back at dawn, and she was just getting into bed. This was the last picture I took, which was a few months back, and this is the sister of that young boy there who was 6 at the time, Danny. It's catching them at a point in their lives where their lives are still very much still forming, and the younger ones are very different to the older ones. And this one here of John, which is the most popular one in the series, and he was 90 when that was taken. He's 92 now. So this is all about. Well, for me, it was all about this big long life he had had. So it's very much the opposite of the kids. It's about looking back, and he had this long story about. He was from Lancashire and he didn't want to work in a coal mine, so he lied about his age, joined the Navy during the war, came back, they still wanted him for the mines, jumped on a ship, became a logger in Canada, ended up selling vacuum cleaners in Sydney. And his house is just full of memorabilia, and so much so that he sleeps on a sleeping bag on the floor. And I took lots of pictures with him, and then on the 5th session, I moved him into the kitchen. It happened to be just a sunny day, just the only time of day when the sunlight hits the room, and I got this one, and I thought this really said something about his character. He's very gentle, very light person. And this man who lives 3 doors away from me, he was very ill, and he's in his 80s now, and he's even more ill now. And I wanted to put something across of that he was approaching the end of his life. So that was the idea. And this one below here, Phyllis, she's Jamaican, and as you can see, she's very, very relaxed, very languid. And we were having a good chat about our colonial roots, because I'm not English, I'm from the colonies like she is, and the difference being that she has slave ancestry. And then she was saying that I can trace my roots back to Scotland and Ireland, but she can't. But her line was that she has many layers to her skin. And the final image here is of a boy called Lewis, who was my next door neighbour. And sometimes at night he would keep me awake because his bedroom was just the other side of a wall to my bedroom. And he would be excited because he plays video games, and he plays with Americans, so he's up all night doing it because of the time difference. And then you could see when I was taking the picture, he wouldn't even stop for me to take a picture, he just carried on playing. I'd lived in my place for 14 years at that point, and he was a baby when I moved in, so he'd grown up there, so his whole life was that bedroom. And you can see from the wall, there were marks on the door where it marked his height as he'd grown up. And that was his life up to that point, and he's moved now. It's an example of how photographs kind of become embellished with through memory and history, and they gain value, not material value, but they gain historical value as more time passes, because that wall is no longer there. And when it gets knocked down, if it gets knocked down, the whole house won't be there. So I guess, thanks for coming.